After thinking for a while yesterday, after I recorded that video, I realized I neglected to really provide a little bit of context towards the latter part of the video. When I really think about what truly set me on a path to Africa, I have to reflect on a reality that it truly didn't begin with a plane ticket or a passport. When I first started thinking about Africa, I didn't have a passport. But it actually began years earlier, in 1999, let me say 1998, 1999, with the Somali community in Ohio, and to a lesser degree, the Ethiopian community, Eritrean community, Sierra Leonean community, and various other immigrant communities that were resettling in Ohio during this period. More specifically, when we think of what was going on in Somalia at that time, and a few years prior to that time, there was civil war and serious strife and suffering in that country. And America had, at the time, a resettlement program whereby if you had one family member, or if you were living in America and you had family members abroad that were refugees, there was a resettlement program that allowed for you to bring over your family. And within that same context, 98, 99, if my memory serves me correctly, there were challenges and really just war, if I just can be quite frank, between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And there were many people from both countries that were seeking refuge in Sudan, in Kenya, and many of those people also came over to America under these refugee programs. And in Ohio, the particular agency that I was working for was called the Interfaith Refugee Services of Ohio. And I was a case manager. At this time, I was really at a crossroads of my life. For those that know me a little bit, I was deeply involved in sort of the music industry in the Midwest. But I didn't, even with that, the accolades that came with that a bit, I still was really craving a purpose. And that's when I came across this job as a refugee case manager. In working at this job, it really opened up my eyes to the realities that I had never, ever encountered before. Families were coming to America from war-torn countries really with nothing but faith and determination. And, my role was really just to help them start over, find housing, connect them with schools, hospitals, and community support. But what began as a job soon became something profoundly spiritual. I never like to, even with the challenges of my African people, I never like to paint them, or I never see them as a victim. I view my brothers and sisters as survivors, even when they find themselves in foreign land. They survive difficulties to reach safety in some regard. So I don't like to consider them a victim. But to the point, within months of working at this job, I became really deeply intertwined in the Somali community in Ohio. At first I was a service provider, someone helping new arrivals adjust to life in America, but soon these professional relationships grew into family. I shared meals with them, attended some weddings, mourned the losses of some of the community members. And the warmth and hospitality with these Somalis, was really nothing like I had experienced before outside of my own family circumstance. And it sort of showed me what community really meant, and how a community, when it is strong and united, can unite other communities that it finds. So it was a very beautiful experience. But one particular experience really speaks to me. One day, I was visiting a recently arrived Somali elder. This brother had been in the Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya for many years. And I don't know if, for people that are familiar with some Somali elders, I don't know if they dye their beard, but he had like a red and oranges type beard, and like stark, piercing eyes. I remember to this day. And he was a bit frail. And I was at his daughter's house in the northern part of Columbus. And I was sort of sitting, maybe an arm's reach of him. And this elder, he sort of gently, grabbed my hands. And I'm a brother who has never really done a whole lot of manual labor in my life before, so I was struck by how rough and strong this elder's hands were. And I'm sure he was probably in his late 70s. And what resonated deeply with me, that I carry to this day, he looked at me and said, "My son, you are just like us." And that was profound, because this was a deeply spiritual Muslim man. I'm not Muslim. This is obviously an African man who lived his life in Africa. I had never been to Africa before, but those words were amazingly profound. In that moment, I would say something shifted inside me. This brother, this elder, who had just met, he didn't see me as an outsider trying to help. He saw me as kin, maybe even as one of his clan, as one of his brothers, as his son. That single sentence saying, "You're one of us," redefined my understanding of identity and belonging. And for the first time, I felt what I can describe as Africanness. Not through a song, not through music, not in a political or academic sense, but in the most human and spiritual way. I realized I wasn't simply helping. Yes, King. I realized I wasn't simply helping African refugees rebuild their lives. I was subconsciously and consciously being reintroduced to my own heritage, my own history, through these people. from that point on, everything I did carried really a different energy, a deeper energy. So that year in Ohio, 1988, 89, it gave me a new sense of purpose and direction before I ever set foot on the African continent. Before I had ever set foot on the African continent in 1998, 1999, Africa had already found me through the laughter, resilience, and faith of my Somali people.